Harrison yanked open the cab door just as a blur of motion crashed into his side. A woman, breathless and frantic, grabbed the door frame to steady herself. "Wait," she gasped, her chest rising and falling with exertion. "Please, can we share? I can't miss this meeting." Harrison hesitated, glancing at his watch. He was already late for his own appointment and every second counted. But something about the desperation in her voice made him shift aside. "Get in." The woman scrambled in beside him, slamming the door shut behind her. "Thank you," she exhaled, pushing a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Midtown, please," she told the driver before turning to Harrison. "I really appreciate this." "Where in Midtown?" he asked. "West 48th, she replied. His brows lifted slightly. "You're in luck. I'm headed that way." She offered a grateful smile, and for the first time, Harrison really looked at her. She wasn't just another rushed New Yorker. There was something striking about her sharp brown eyes, flushed cheeks from running, and a determined set to her jaw that intrigued him. "I'm Harrison, by the way," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for only a second before shaking it. "Lena." The touch of her palm against his sent an unexpected jolt through him, but he quickly dismissed it. "So, what's this big meeting you can't be late for?" Lena groaned, leaning back against the seat. "A job interview. My dream job, actually. But thanks to my terrible luck with the subway, I almost missed it." "Sounds important." "It is. If I don't get this, I don't know what I'll do." She let out a breathy laugh. "Sorry. I don't usually unload my problems on strangers." "You think we're still strangers after sharing a cab during a crisis?" He shot her a teasing look. Lena chuckled. "Fair point." The taxi jerked forward as traffic inched along. Harrison checked his watch again. "If this cab doesn't move faster, we're both doomed." Lena groaned in frustration. "Perfect. Just my luck." "You always this unlucky?" "You have no idea," she sighed. "This morning, my coffee machine broke, I spilled juice on my resume, and then my heel snapped while running for the train." Harrison let out a low laugh. "That's impressive. Ever consider carrying a lucky charm?" She gave him a playful glare. "If you have one, I'll take it." He thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver coin. "Here." Lena looked at it curiously. "What is it?" "My grandfather gave it to me when I was a kid. Said it brings good luck." She hesitated. "You're just giving it to me?" "Borrowing," he corrected. "Until you land the job." Lena studied him for a moment before taking it. "All right, but I'll find you and return it." "You better," he said, amused. The cab finally picked up speed, and a few minutes later, they reached her destination. Lena grabbed her bag, pausing before stepping out. "Thank you, Harrison." "Really? Go get that job, Lena," he said with a small smile. She nodded, then rushed out, disappearing into the building's entrance. Harrison watched her go, an odd feeling settling in his chest. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. It was just a shared cab, a fleeting moment. Nothing more. Or so he thought. Harrison stepped out of the cab and into the crisp autumn air, brushing a hand through his hair as he hurried toward the glass doors of the towering office building. His meeting had started 10 minutes ago, and he wasn't the kind of man who showed up late. Ever. But as he pressed the elevator button, his mind wasn't on his impending pitch, it was on the woman who had just rushed out of the cab. Lena. There was something about her energy, the way she carried herself, the way she had laughed despite her bad luck. It had been a fleeting encounter, but it lingered in his thoughts in a way he didn't fully understand. The elevator dinged, and he stepped inside, shaking off the distraction. He had more pressing matters to focus on. Days passed, and life resumed its usual rhythm. Harrison buried himself in work, long hours bleeding into late nights. But every so often his fingers would brush the empty space in his pocket where his lucky coin had been, and he'd think of her. It was ridiculous. He didn't even know her last name. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A week later, as he walked into his favorite cafe, he spotted a familiar figure at the counter. Lena. She was standing with her back to him, balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear as she dug through her purse. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands slipping free. Harrison didn't think. He moved toward her. "Did it work?" She turned sharply at the sound of his voice, her brown eyes widening in surprise before recognition dawned. A slow smile spread across her lips. "You," she breathed. "Me," he said, amused. "So? The job. Did you get it?" Lena's face lit up. "I did." A strange, unexpected satisfaction settled in his chest. "Then I believe you have something of mine." Her brow furrowed before realization struck. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small silver coin, holding it up between her fingers. I was starting to think I'd never run into you again. Guess fate had other plans, he said lightly. She placed the coin in his palm, her fingers brushing his. A fleeting touch, but one that sent an undeniable warmth up his arm. Thank you, by the way, she said. I know it was just a cab ride, but it meant more than you realize. Harrison studied her for a beat. There was a sincerity in her voice, something unguarded. He liked that about her. So how's the new job treating you? He asked. Lena sighed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It's been a whirlwind. Exciting, terrifying, exhausting. But I love it. Good, he said. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but charged. Lena shifted on her feet. I should let you get back to whatever you were doing. Without thinking, Harrison spoke. Have coffee with me. She blinked. What? I was going to grab a coffee. Stay. Join me. Lena hesitated, glancing at her watch. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Then we'll make it a quick one, he said smoothly. She studied him for a moment before a small smile curved her lips. All right, but only because you lent me your lucky charm. They found a table near the window, the city bustling outside. As they sat, Lena wrapped her hands around her cup, looking at him with quiet curiosity. So, Harrison, she began, tilting her head slightly. What do you do when you're not rescuing strangers from transportation disasters? He chuckled. I work in business development, mostly strategy and negotiations. Sounds intense. It can be, but I enjoy the challenge. Lena nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. I get that. I thrive on challenges too. I think that's why I wanted this job so badly. It's fast-paced, unpredictable. Keeps me on my toes. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from work to travel to favorite books. Every time she spoke, Harrison found himself more intrigued. She was sharp, passionate, full of life in a way that made the world around her seem brighter. And then, all too soon, she glanced at her phone and winced. I really need to go. Harrison felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. As she stood, she hesitated, then reached into her bag. She pulled out a napkin and scribbled something on it before sliding it toward him. My number, she said, her gaze meeting his. In case you ever feel like sharing another cab. Harrison picked up the napkin, a slow smile forming. I think I'd like that, he said. Lena flashed him one last smile before slipping out the door, disappearing into the crowd. Harrison sat there for a moment, staring at the napkin in his hand. Maybe their first meeting had been luck. But this felt like something more. Harrison had never been the type to hesitate. His world revolved around decisions made swiftly, efficiently. Yet, for the first time in as long as he could remember, he found himself staring at a number scrawled on a napkin, debating his next move. It had been 3 days since he and Lena had shared coffee, and though he'd had every intention of calling her, something held him back. Maybe it was the unfamiliar pull in his chest, the way she had lingered in his thoughts far longer than was logical for someone he barely knew. He wasn't supposed to overthink things like this. So, with a deep breath, he pressed the call button. Lena answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the same warmth and energy he remembered. I was starting to think you lost the napkin. A quiet chuckle escaped him. I debated waiting a full week just to test your patience. You would have regretted that, she teased. I'm excellent at holding grudges. Something about the ease between them made his hesitation seem ridiculous. How about dinner? She paused as if considering. I don't know, she mused. I barely know you. What if you're secretly terrible company? Then I suppose you'll have to suffer through an entire meal to find out. A beat of silence, then a soft laugh. All right, Harrison. Dinner it is. They settled on a small, tucked-away restaurant near the West Village, one that Lena insisted had the best seafood in the city. When Harrison arrived, she was already waiting outside, arms folded against the evening chill. He hadn't thought much about what to expect, but seeing her again sent something unsteady through him. She was dressed simply, yet there was something effortless about the way she carried herself, as if she belonged anywhere she chose to be. I was beginning to think you stood me up, she said, eyes glinting with mischief. I like to make an entrance. She rolled her eyes but let him hold the door open for her as they stepped inside. The restaurant was intimate, the kind of place where the lighting was low and the hum of conversation wrapped around them like a quiet melody. They were seated near a window, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. As soon as they settled in, Lena leaned forward slightly, her curiosity evident. So, tell me something about you that I wouldn't guess. Harrison considered this, setting his menu aside. I played the violin when I was younger. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? That's unexpected. Why? She tilted her head. You seem controlled. Like you're always thinking 3 steps ahead. The violin feels emotional. Messy. His lips quirked slightly. Maybe that's why I stopped. Lena studied him for a moment as if filing the information away. All right, your turn. What's something I wouldn't guess about me? He took his time watching her. You don't drink coffee for the caffeine. You drink it because you like the ritual of it. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. How did you? You savor it. The way you hold the cup, the way you let yourself pause before taking a sip. It's not about needing energy. It's about the moment. Lena exhaled a soft laugh, shaking her head. That's unsettlingly accurate. He shrugged. I noticed things. Their conversation flowed as effortlessly as before, weaving between light-hearted teasing and moments of quiet sincerity. Harrison found himself telling her things he rarely shared, small pieces of himself that didn't normally make their way into casual conversation. And she did the same. By the time their plates were cleared, he realized he wasn't ready for the evening to end. As they stepped outside, the night air crisp around them, Lena tucked her hands into her coat pockets. Well, that wasn't terrible, she teased. I'll take that as high praise. She glanced up at him, something unreadable in her expression. Walk with me. He nodded and they fell into step together, the city stretching out before them. At some point, Lena slowed, turning to face him. This is unexpected. Harrison raised an eyebrow. The walk. She shook her head. You. He didn't say anything, waiting. I don't usually do this, she admitted. Go on spontaneous dinners with men I barely know. Feel this. She hesitated, then exhaled as if deciding to say it anyway. This kind of pull. His chest tightened at her words, because they mirrored his own thoughts too closely. He took a step closer, closing the space between them. Then what do we do about it? Lena held his gaze for a long moment before she smiled, slow and certain. We see where it goes. And for the first time in a long time, Harrison had no desire to plan his next move. Harrison couldn't remember the last time he had felt this way. It wasn't just attraction that was easy, predictable. This was something deeper, more unsettling. For the past few weeks, he and Lena had fallen into an unspoken rhythm. Dinner that first night had led to late-night calls, impromptu coffee runs, and stolen moments between their chaotic schedules. It was never planned, but somehow they kept ending up in the same place, as if the city itself conspired to pull them together. He wasn't used to this kind of connection, the kind that sneaked up on him, making him rethink the rules he had always followed. Harrison didn't do relationships that weren't carefully considered. And yet, with Lena, he was finding himself in moments he hadn't anticipated, drawn into something he wasn't sure he had control over anymore. Tonight was no different. Lena had invited him to a small art exhibit in a tucked-away gallery downtown. He wasn't particularly into art, but he had agreed without hesitation because it meant getting to see her. When he arrived, she was already inside, standing in front of a large abstract painting. She tilted her head slightly, studying it, her bottom lip caught between her teeth. Harrison moved beside her, his presence drawing her attention. You made it, she said, a pleased note in her voice. You sound surprised. She turned to fully face him. You don't seem like the type who spends his Friday nights in an art gallery. I'm not, he admitted. But I wanted to see what you see. A flicker of something past in her expression, something warm, something unreadable. She gestured toward the painting. So, what do you think? He studied the bold strokes of color, the way they bled into one another in chaotic harmony. I think I don't get it. Lena laughed. That's fair. But you do. She nodded, her gaze drifting back to the canvas. It's not about understanding. It's about feeling something when you look at it. Harrison watched her, realizing that was exactly what she did to him. He had spent his whole life analyzing, predicting, controlling. But with Lena, there was no strategy, no calculated moves, just the undeniable pull of her presence, unraveling something inside him he hadn't even realized was wound so tightly. As if sensing his thoughts, she glanced at him, her expression softer now. Come with me, she said, slipping her fingers around his wrist. She led him through the gallery, weaving between people until they reached a quieter corner where a smaller painting hung. It was different from the other's, subtle, restrained. "This is my favorite," she confessed. He studied it, the way the muted tones blended together, creating something delicate yet powerful. "Why?" Lena hesitated, then exhaled. "Because it's unfinished. The artist never completed it, but there's something beautiful about that. It's not perfect, but it still matters." Harrison's chest tightened at her words. She turned to him, something searching in her gaze. "Not everything has to be planned, Harrison. Sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to control them." He knew she wasn't just talking about the painting. Before he could respond, a voice called her name. Lena turned, and Harrison followed her gaze to see a man approaching, a tall, well-dressed figure with an easy smile. Harrison didn't recognize him, but something about the way Lena's expression shifted sent a quiet warning through him. "Lena," the man said as he reached them. "It's been a while." Lena's posture stiffened ever so slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Ethan." Harrison watched the exchange, his instincts kicking in. Whoever this was, he wasn't just a friend. Ethan's gaze flickered to Harrison, assessing. "And you are?" "Harrison," he said evenly. Ethan nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I see." Lena cleared her throat. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," Ethan said smoothly. "Didn't expect to run into you, though." Small world. There was something in his tone that rubbed Harrison the wrong way. Lena shifted beside him. "Yeah, small world." Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a beat too long before he finally stepped back. "Good seeing you, Lena. Enjoy your night." Harrison watched as he disappeared into the crowd before turning to Lena, who was now staring at the floor, her jaw tight. "Who was that?" he asked. She hesitated, then met his gaze. "My ex." Something inside Harrison hardened. Lena exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "I wasn't expecting to see him tonight." Harrison didn't push. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was trying to shake it off. Instead, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Lena looked up at him, startled, but then her expression softened. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yeah." But Harrison knew that wasn't entirely true. And for the first time, he realized just how much he wanted to be the person she could let her guard down with. Lena hadn't expected to see Ethan, and she certainly hadn't expected the way it would rattle her. It had been over a year since they ended things, but something about running into him in that crowded gallery made her stomach twist in a way she didn't like. Harrison hadn't pried, and she was grateful for that. Instead, he had simply held her hand, his fingers steady and warm against hers, grounding her in a way she hadn't known she needed. Now, as they walked through the quiet streets, the city humming softly around them, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you want to talk about it?" Harrison asked, his voice even, giving her the space to decide. Lena considered it. Part of her wanted to brush past it, to pretend that seeing Ethan hadn't stirred something old and unwanted inside her. But another part of her, the part that had grown to trust Harrison in ways she hadn't expected, knew he deserved honesty. "We were together for 3 years, she said finally. "I thought he was the one. And then, one day, I realized I was wrong." Harrison didn't push, but his silence told her he was listening. Lena glanced at him, then back at the pavement beneath their feet. "He wasn't a bad person. He just never saw me. Not really. I spent so much time trying to be what he wanted that I forgot who I was." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "It took me a long time to figure out that love isn't supposed to make you feel small. That was the truth of it." With Ethan, she had felt like she was always reaching, always trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. With Harrison, it was different. He didn't ask her to be anything other than who she was. "Why did it take you so long to walk away?" he asked, his tone careful as if he already knew the answer. Lena hesitated. "Because I thought love was supposed to be hard. I thought if I just tried a little more, gave a little more, then maybe he'd finally see me." Harrison stopped walking. Lena turned to face him, and when she met his gaze, there was something intense in his expression, something that made her breath catch. "You don't have to prove your worth to someone," Lena. The right person will know it without you having to try so damn hard. Her chest tightened, because she could feel the weight of his words, the conviction behind them. She had spent years waiting for someone to choose her, to fight for her. And now, here was Harrison, standing before her, looking at her like she was already enough. She swallowed hard, the air between them thick with something unspoken. "Harrison?" she started, unsure of what she was going to say, only knowing that she needed to say something. But before she could, he reached for her hand again, his fingers threading through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come on," he said, his voice quieter now. "Let's get out of here." They walked without a destination, letting the city guide them. And for the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't thinking about the past. She wasn't thinking about Ethan or mistakes, or the things she had lost. She was thinking about now. And now was Harrison beside her, his hand in hers, the quiet certainty of his presence settling something deep inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to figure everything out right this second. Maybe this was enough. Harrison had never believed in fate. He had built his life on decisions, on calculated risks, on logic. But as he stood in Lena's doorway later that evening, watching the way she looked at him like he was something unexpected but not unwelcome, he felt something shift inside him. She leaned against the frame, her fingers trailing lightly over the edge of the door. The city lights cast a soft glow around them, illuminating the quiet uncertainty in her expression. "This is the part where you say goodnight," she said, but there was no finality in her voice. Harrison stepped closer, his pulse steady but strong. "And if I don't want to?" Lena's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. He lifted a hand, brushing his fingers gently along the side of her face, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Tell me to walk away," he murmured. She didn't. Instead, she reached for him, her hands pressing against his chest as she tilted her head up. "I don't want you to." That was all he needed. He closed the space between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that wasn't rushed or fleeting, but deep and certain. Her fingers curled into his shirt as she pulled him closer, and he let himself sink into her, into this moment that felt inevitable. When they finally broke apart, Lena exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "I didn't see this coming." Harrison smiled, his thumb tracing her jaw. "Neither did I." She searched his face, her expression softening. "But I don't regret it." "Me neither." Lena pulled him inside, the door clicking shut behind them. Weeks passed, and whatever was happening between them settled into something real. It wasn't rushed or chaotic, it was steady. Something that felt like it had always been there, just waiting for them to find it. Harrison wasn't used to this kind of ease. His world had always been structured, built on strategy and control. But Lena was different. She challenged him without trying, made him rethink things he had never questioned before. And he liked it. One evening, they sat on her couch, an old movie playing in the background. Lena was curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. She traced absent patterns on his forearm, her voice quieter than usual. "I used to think love was supposed to be complicated." Harrison glanced down at her. "And now?" She hesitated, then looked up at him. "Now I think it's supposed to feel like this." His chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with uncertainty and everything to do with knowing. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, letting himself believe, for the first time, that maybe fate had a hand in this after all. And this time, he wasn't going to question it.